Wearing little makeup and no jewelry, this 47-year-old Mrs. Onassis said she felt no longing for the opulent clothes and lifestyle. You love to see it, the way you love to see Gone with the Wind. But wouldn't you rather wear your blue jeans than wander around in a hoop skirt? Jackie had shed her proverbial hoop skirt, and the world would just have to accept it. Now they're getting a Jackie who's comfortable with her own self. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and today we are wrapping up a great many things. This episode is the fourth episode in this book on Jackie Kennedy, these eyes right here in the middle. And we have had other women that we have had wrap-up episodes about, but all the other ones we only got 2 chapters in the book. Jackie has been kind of the spine of this book. We got to see her in early life and pre-assassination. Then we got to see her in the immediate post-assassination. Then in her marriage to Aristotle Onassis. And now we're getting to see her in kind of her career woman stage after Aristotle Onassis. I do want to say before we get into the book that we have already started Chappaquiddick by Leo D'Amour, and it is so good. I have been fascinated by the level of detail that he gives, and I want to say too that each phrase is cited in the back. So we're given chapter and page and the exact place that he derived that information from, whether it's a radio interview or a book that was done or an article that was published or an interview given at the time. He cites every single fact. And so you guys are going to want to join me for this. It is different from Ask Not in that it is a step-by-step look at this one incident, but it is factual and it is fascinating. And so I am finding that there's less heaviness and there's more just curiosity and intellectual kind of intrigue. So I want to invite you to join me for Chappaquiddick. Now let's get into our reading. While still married to Aristotle Onassis, Jackie had almost taken on a project with NBC. They had pitched her a show where they would pay her $500,000 to talk about endangered relics like Angkor Wat and Venice. This fit perfectly with her interests. She had, of course, interests in history and geography and culture and travel and preservation, but Ari forbade it. No Greek wife works, he said. This was 1973, and she was still her husband's wife, and she needed to play that part. She could have anything financially that her heart desired, and yet she's wasting away. She's watching Ari cavort with other women, and it increasingly feels untenable to her. She is spending more time in New York City and traveling to places elsewhere. She is restless. Not only did she have psychiatrists, analysts, chiropractor, massage therapist, acupuncturist, she would joke that she had a doctor for everything. But not only that, but she was also fascinated with India, and she was kind of on the hunt for a guru or sage or someone who could free her from all of the nightmares and PTSD that she had carried with her now for decades. Still, the month of November was the most dreaded month, and it was difficult, and she was looking for freedom from that. As she did this work through this season of her life, she came to 3 realizations. The first was that the best thing she could do for herself was to make peace with never being at peace with what happened that day in Dallas. The way Jack died, the way she nearly died. I mean, she was, feet from fatal bullets. And the assassination's constant existence in the media were not things that she could get over. That was number 1. She needed to accept it, integrate it, learn to live with this terrible tragedy. Number 2 was that an idle mind would only exacerbate the problems that she had, that she really needed to work. and she needed to use her mind. And the third was that she became increasingly convinced that the only way to become who she wanted to be was to divorce Ari. I just want to say first that this, especially the first realization of being okay with not being okay, is actually so good to see her get to that place. Because since our first meeting of Jackie, she was in the car with him all through that first episode. If you remember, those were some of the chapters where Maureen Callahan jumps back and forth in timeline. So we'd start in Dallas and then go back to their dating years, start in Dallas, go back to early marriage, start in Dallas, show a miscarriage or a stillbirth. And so through that, we got to know early Jackie. But those things that had happened to her in that car were things that are very singular. No other human on earth has ever felt the things that she felt. Many humans have felt pieces of what she felt, right? Or could identify with an aspect of it. We've perhaps lost a husband, or perhaps we've been in a violent situation and actually literally had bullets whizzing past us. But to have everything she had in that moment, from losing her husband to the threat of death, the fear of who was doing it to him, that this isn't just like a guy who came into the 7-Eleven and started shooting it up for money. They actually don't fully know who was responsible. Yes, there's Lee Harvey Oswald. We'll get into that sometime. We'll get into that. But, she's wondering. I mean, everybody's wondering. Frankly, Hoover, LBJ, RFK, they're all trying to figure out who did this thing and trying to put their fingers on the pulse of, are there a larger group of people? And she definitely carried those fears. Not only that, she's got a single mom thing going on. Not only that, but the people that she has around her, she doesn't even know fully who she can trust. She's got LBJ, hey there, sweet, little lady. But she didn't know if she can trust him. On top of all of that, she's in the public eye and having to put on this great pageant of his funeral. Like, there's no other human on earth that can fully grasp all of those elements that I just named. And so for her to realize, I've just got to accept it and get on with it is huge. It's huge and it's true. And I think a lot of us, whatever we're struggling with, there are things where I think the best way through something is through it. I don't think stuffing helps. But I think going through it, working through it as best you can, and then going ahead and getting on with it, learning to live with it and integrate it into your life is so good. In late 1974, Jackie approached the legendary editor William Shawn of The New Yorker because she wanted to write a piece for him. I love this. She had wanted to write for the magazine since she was a young woman. You might remember that she had an interest in photography and books and writing from a young age. And she kind of set some of those things aside and didn't do much with many of them. Although certainly there are tendrils of her being able to see with a photographer's eye, or being able to think through the lens of what kind of story are we writing here. And she did that, like with Camelot, right? Like with the planning of the funeral. She used those talents and skills that she naturally had carried with her all of her life. But now she's made a pitch. She wants to cover the imminent opening of the International Center of Photography in New York City. Jackie had been a young photographer. She had also been the most photographed woman in the world. Everyone was interested in her. Not only that, but she was immortalized in the Zapruder film. And she, of course, had been sought out by the paparazzi, even illegally. So she understood photography and imagery, and she wants to cover this opening. She's recognizing the importance of uncomfortable imagery, and she wants to write about it. And so it was a great idea. So interesting. I love that she is still pressing the bounds of what she's comfortable with and trying new things. She's 44 or 45 years old. And so he accepts her pitch, but with a very interesting caveat. The piece is going to run without a byline, meaning her name will not be attached to it at all. And the article and her photography choices and all of it would live or die on its own merits with no name attached. I think this is so brilliant, and I think it feeds into the next things that we're going to see her do. But it's a chance for her to take this huge risk and use her skills and yet not be accepted for her name or for her place in history, but just on the quality of the work that she does. So I love that idea. Jackie's finished story ran up front in the weekly's Talk of the Town section on January 13th, 1975. Her attention to detail was impressive, from the look and body language of her subjects to the thought that she gave to the center interior and layout. And she even talked about the then current debate over the medium of photography that was happening in France. Henri Cartier-Bresson had sparked controversy by saying that he considered his paintings far more legitimate than his photography. And Jackie ended her piece by quoting Cartier-Bresson on his philosophy. She saw herself potentially in this quote. "I'm a bunch of nerves, but I take advantage of it. You have to be yourself and you have to forget yourself. The world is being created every minute, and the world is falling to pieces every minute. It is these tensions I am always moved by." So the article came out the same month that she joined an architect in a bid to save Grand Central Terminal. The crown jewel of New York City's architecture was on the verge of being demolished. It had been perceived to have run its course, and it was going to be replaced with a grim 50-story office tower. Well, Jackie gets together with the architect and holds a press conference. And same month, January 30th, it makes the front page of the New York Times. Her presence, of course, ensured that. So on this article, no name attached. On this one, she's fully using her name. "Jackie Onassis will save us," the architect said. "Europe has its cathedrals, and we have Grand Central." Her activism was powerful because she wasn't splashing it around everywhere she could go. But she said, "I think this is so terribly important." And this is the first time America has heard from Jackie directly since she was that young widow in 1964. Back then, she had been thanking the nation for the outpouring of sympathy. She had gotten nearly 800,000 letters of condolence. And Bobby had been at her side back then. He's no more. Today, though, she's speaking to the country as a soon-to-be divorcee, leveraging her power unabashedly. And people were interested. She was at the height of her beauty. Her dark hair was falling around her face, large gold hoop earrings. She looked like a modern woman. She said, "We've all heard that it's too late, or that it has to happen, or that it's inevitable that Grand Central Station would be demolished. I don't think that's true, because I think that if there's a great effort, even if it's the 11th hour, then you can succeed. And I know that's what we'll do. If we don't care about our past, we cannot hope for our future." A few weeks later, she made a handwritten plea to New York's mayor, Abe Beame. She wrote, "Is it not cruel to let our city die by degrees, stripped of all her proud moments, until there's nothing left of all her history and beauty to inspire our children? If they're not inspired by the past of our city, where will they find the strength to fight for her future?" Within weeks of reading Jackie's letter, Beame announced that he would do everything in his power to preserve Grand Central, which he called a symbol of life in the city of New York. And he did. This was Jackie's second big win of the year. It was proof that she had some things to offer besides wifedom. This is kind of hitting at some of the ethos of that era that perhaps all a woman had to offer was being a wife. But I think there were women that were challenging that, certainly. And, she's one of them. She's not a sole voice proving this, but she is, I think more than anything, probably proving it to herself, that she could do something different than just be the arm accessory of a powerful man. Well, Ari and Jackie had been living largely separate lives when he died in March 1975 in Paris. It followed months of ill health, and unlike with her first marriage, she did not pretend anything about this ending. She didn't pretend that it had been a grand love story, but what she did say, I think, is very truthful and honoring. She said, "Aristotle Onassis rescued me at a time when my life was engulfed in shadows. He meant a lot to me. He brought me into a world where one could find happiness and love." And so she has told the truth about this marriage. She hasn't written some grand Greek narrative. She's just said what's true. And bravo, Jackie. She began searching for a new purpose. The people who knew her, former social secretary and columnist friends that she had, they suggested that Jackie consider working in book publishing as an editor. Well, it did make sense. Books were among Jackie's greatest loves. She was constantly consuming them. She found them to be her emotional solace and sustenance through life. Apart from her children, nothing brought her as great joy. Jackie was social. She loved meeting new and fascinating people, but at her core, she was a loner. So this kind of work would fit who she was truly as a person. Becoming an editor would mean lunches and book launches and office work, but it would also mean hours away on her own, just getting to think and enjoy that process of a book, becoming an idea to the book, to the editing remarks, and then published to the public. So she began thinking this was a good idea and was excited, but on the other hand, going back into the workforce was a risk. She knew nothing about this world. She had no colleagues to whom she had to keep up relationships. She had never dealt with people who might sell her out or be vicious toward her in a workplace. She wondered, too, if the press was going to laugh at her. Jackie Onassis? Out of nowhere, a book editor? Then again, she figured they had treated her far worse when she married Ari, so why not give it a go? She reaches out to a friend and asks, might there be a job for me? Jason Epstein, an executive at Random House, was taken aback. Jackie had no practical experience as a book editor. She hadn't worked in a professional setting since 1953, 22 years prior. She's in the position of lots of women, right? After they've done the job of raising their children and they're ready to re-enter. He felt that the learning curve was steep, and actually this criticism I really understand. He thought that there were only a few entry-level positions, and if he gave it to her, he would be moving someone else out of the way, someone who was qualified for that job, and he just didn't feel like he could do it. So I think that's fair. And Jackie did too. She didn't debate him. She knew that if he had really wanted her, he would have found a way. And so she says, thank you. I don't want to impose. I understand. Well, she turned to a different friend who was a publisher at Viking, and he had concerns too, but he saw Jackie as an asset. He thought her celebrity could lure the kind of high-class, high-interest authors that Viking wanted. A-list stars, celebrities, movers and shakers in the world. And who would refuse her phone call, he thought. She wasn't qualified to be like a hands-on line editor or conceptualize a book. She didn't know about that stuff yet, but he thought she would be a draw. And so he offers Jackie a position as an acquisitions editor with a chance to learn how to edit books if she buckled down. "You're not really equipped to be an editor yet," he told her. "It's not that you don't have the ability for it, but you don't have the background or training." Her salary would be $200 a week, $10,000 a year. She would have a junior office with no window, and there would be no special treatment. Well, she was so thankful for the job. She gladly took it. She did work out that she could work from home one day a week. So she was an early work from home enthusiast. She had a launch party for her first book. It was called In the Russian Style, and it was held at the Carlisle, which is where Jack had had a residential suite. This event was covered by the New York Times, and they wrote, "Mrs. Onassis displayed considerable knowledge of Russian history as she spoke." So this was another party recognizing her gifts. Just like the article had been her standing on her merits, here she's standing on her merits with a book. There's a product, and it's either going to rise and fall on its own merits. Yes, she's there. Yes, they're at the Carlisle, where there's this history with the Kennedy family, and yet the paper is having to interact with her as a person. If she had gotten out there and flopped, then she would have flopped. But they're noting, okay, no, this is the real deal. This is a real book with merit. It was a photographed history of bygone Soviet aristocrats. And so it had been well researched, and it was, of course, beautiful because of her eye. But the Times writes, "Wearing little makeup and no jewelry, this 47-year-old Mrs. Onassis said she felt no longing for the opulent clothes and lifestyle of the Russian nobility." Listen to this quote. "You love to see it, the way you love to see Gone with the Wind. But wouldn't you rather wear your blue jeans than wander around in a hoop skirt?" Jackie had shed her proverbial hoop skirt, and the world would just have to accept it. So we have this woman, 47 years old. She's lived multiple epochs of her life. And y'all, I can really identify with that. We have had multiple different areas of life where we've dipped in for a significant season of our life and then moved on to something different. We've even lived in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And so I can really identify with this part of her where she has been almost in that world where there's costumes and appearance, and she's identifying with that and saying, I know that world, and yet wouldn't you rather be where you are now? And it's really beautiful that she's able to articulate that and just be who she's become. She had already become this woman in Greece. We saw her kick back, simple hair tied back. Ari didn't like it at all. But Americans are just now getting a glimpse of this no longer completely put together from head to toe, completely buttoned up and presentable in a political way, Jackie. Now they're getting a Jackie who's comfortable with her own self. And it's admirable. It's lovely. Her attitude towards sex and marriage had also undergone a significant shift. And when her teenagers begin having significant others come home, she doesn't see any reason to keep up, what she sees as antiquated sexual mores of, you guys have to sleep in separate bedrooms. You're not going to sleep together under my roof. She doesn't see any reason to do that. She said it's damaging and silly to act like that's not happening. And so we're not going to do that. She didn't want them to grow up with the same sexual mores as the Kennedys had had. Y'all know, I don't agree with that. I don't think we have our adult children pretend to be something they're not. And yet you are still, king of your own castle, captain of your own ship, and you do get to run your house in the ways that you think are best. And so really what's happening is not that she's saying don't pretend. She's probably actually just getting okay with the fact that they're sleeping together. Because I don't think you could take this same logic into every area of life. Well, I know you're doing meth, so it's no big deal. You just, bring it into my home. I mean, I think all of us at some point, I know you're, going around and harming small animals and then dissecting them in your home. So no big deal. When you come for the weekend, you can do the same thing in my guest bedroom. Like, sure, here's a dissection kit. Like, we don't do that. And so on some level, there would be lines that she's drawn. So the line really isn't that she's not having them pretend, because there would be things that if they were doing that were wrong, she probably still would have had them pretend about that they weren't. But the real issue is that she's probably just okay with it. So that's my perspective. And I don't think we have to have everything in our home. And I don't think, I think it's okay to have standards. I thought this part was interesting. She told an adult John one November that she had been rethinking her first marriage, and she didn't think it would have survived today. She thinks she would have left Jack Kennedy. The most interesting men to her now were the smart ones, writers and artists. She had a TV producer who she asked to lunch and then invited back to her place for sex. He never heard from Jackie again. And he told a mutual friend that the encounter had left him shocked that women now treated sex the way men did, as fun, casual, and meaningless. Okay, y'all, I don't like this. It's not just my own sexual mores. It's that I don't think the culture is best served when women look at something low that men are doing and go, oh, you guys are all into porn? Great, we're all gonna get into porn too. Oh, you guys are all playing video games nonstop and can't engage with normal social interaction? Well, that's what we're gonna do too, because we're just as good as men. I don't like that way of thinking at all, and I don't like it in this. I don't think it's right that, men treat it as casual and meaningless and just for fun, so women can too. I mean, do I think women can? Yeah, we live in a free, liberal society where people can make the choices that they want to make. So I'm not advocating for like locking everybody in a cage and keeping them according to my sexual mores. But what I'm saying is, I don't think this is actually satisfying. I don't think this actually is good for men. And therefore, when women go, oh, cool, men treat it that way, I'm going to do the same. I don't think that's admirable. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it was good for Jackie. Now, there might have been things that were being excised from her because her therapy hadn't helped, and she, like we talked about, was carrying a heavy burden. But I don't think that this is the way to actually deal with what you're going to do with sex. Ultimately, it is not just a fun, casual, meaningless act. And so to treat it that way, it's not, now it can be very fun, but to treat it that way is actually a lie. It's not only fun, casual, and meaningless. In fact, I would say it's never meaningless. It always carries great meaning, which is why we have special laws around it when someone does that act against someone unwillingly. It's not the same as, tossing a plastic fork onto their restaurant table. That's meaningless. We don't make laws that if I angrily come at you and toss a fork at your table, but it does nothing to your person, nobody's going to come and probably arrest me for that. But there are things that are all around sex that we've even built our laws about because we recognize it's not meaningless. So, whatever. I don't love that. But let's go on with Jackie's story. Well, Jackie keeps trying to forge her own identity, but it's getting harder and harder. The first year at Viking, which was meant to be a slow, instructive year where she could pick up skills and learn the basics of being a book editor. A new buzzy novel was being shopped around to all the major publishing houses and was thought to be a surefire bestseller. The story centered around Ted Kennedy, whom Archer imagined as President of the United States, and it was centered on a plot to assassinate him. Random House had already made an offer, but Viking was taking a look, and her editor wants it badly. I've got a problem with a manuscript, he said. How? Jackie asked. It's a caper thriller novel. Like many of these things, it has a gimmick, an assassination plot. What are you getting at, Tom? Well, in this case, it's Ted Kennedy, and the year is 1983. Jackie blanched. And I do want to say, because we're nearing the end of this book, that in this book, it seems like dozens of people are blanching all the time. They never get a little pale. They never grow white as a ghost. They never are shocked or in horror. They're always blanching. So I don't know why this word is suddenly the word that we use for this all the time, but Jackie blanched. She took a moment to gather herself. Well, is it a pretty good book? Is this pretty commercial? It is, he said. And she told him that she appreciated him coming to her and that he should buy the book. He did. And he was proven right in a way. The book was commercial. It did garner interest, but not in the way he foresaw. A prominent critic in the New York Times closed his review with these 3 lines. There is a word for such a book. The word is trash. Anybody associated with its publication should be ashamed of herself. Herself. He meant Jackie. Well, within 5 days, her job was no more. On October 15th, 1977, the Times ran a front page story headline titled, Mrs. Onassis Resigns Editing Post. Here's the statement she issued through her assistant. Last spring, when told of the book, I tried to separate my lives as a Viking employee and a Kennedy relative. But this fall, when it was suggested that I had something to do with acquiring the book and that I was not distressed by its publication, I felt I had to resign. It was a heartbreak. She had only been at her job for 10 months and she had begun to find her rhythm. People in the office, when she had first come, they were all like dressing up in their very best clothes, which of course they would, right? We would all think of Jackie O as this fashion icon. And so everybody would wear their best and look their best. And they had finally stopped doing that. People were wearing blue jeans around her again and not wearing their finer clothes. And not only that, but like they see her around the office and she's getting to interact like a normal person. And she made her own phone calls and made her own copies and made her own coffee. And she's in her own right, her own woman. And so this was such a disappointment for her. So at this point, it was clear that Jackie's unique fame cut both ways. It could get you in with the right people, but it could also land you on the streets and cost you your job. And she wondered, would anyone ever take her seriously again? But to Jackie's delight, Doubleday came around and they offered $20,000 a year, which was twice her Viking salary. And she only had a 3-day in-office work week. On February 13th, 1978, Jackie began her new job as an associate editor. And she reported to 2 women, which she had never done before. She said, I've never known professional women. I've never worked for women before. So the whole world is adjusting to women, to the cycles of our lives, that we have seasons of young motherhood where perhaps we do tend to, certainly in this season, prioritize the family, but then that there comes a time when, you're past that. And so she's adjusting to women who work, the world is adjusting to Jackie working. And at Viking, she kept her head down. She kept her office door open. She worked Tuesdays through Thursdays and brought her own little lunch and ate at her desk. She never pretended that she wasn't a celebrity. In fact, she was willing to use her status when asked. In the mid-'80s, even though she preferred not to, she flew to London and approached Princess Diana about writing her memoir. That was a no. She was also asked to persuade Michael Jackson to write his autobiography. So she swallowed her distaste and flew to the Neverland Ranch of Michael Jackson. This time, she succeeded. She had her own passion projects, topics that she was interested in, and she felt excited about those, and many became bestsellers. Books about the power of the mind and healing the soul, and even a prima ballerina that Jackie had been interested in. She helped persuade this prima ballerina to write her autobiography. So Jackie had found her groove. She was done with being the story, and now she was kind of shepherding other people's stories through this process. One woman named Barbara Chase Rybold told a story of being on the island of Scorpios during the time of Jackie's marriage to Ari. And she and Jackie had had a conversation about Sally Hemings, which was Thomas Jefferson's slave and the mother of at least 6 of his children, This was a disturbing part of American history that at this point was relatively unknown. But Jackie, back in Greece on Ari's Island, had encouraged Barbara to go ahead and do the research and write this story. And so this was well before she was a book editor. But Chase Rybold later wrote, "After lunch, we were sitting on the beach while boats filled with paparazzi circled the island with telephoto lens, and I told Jacqueline the story of Sally Hemings, my desire that the world know who she was, and my own frustration at perhaps not having the skills or stamina to write this book. It took 3 years," she wrote, "from the time that a concerned Jacqueline Onassis had turned to me and said, 'You must write this story,' to the time it was published at Viking Press with her as my acquiring editor." So this is really wonderful that Jackie, in a recent episode, we were talking about how Carolyn Bessette had this sudden intoxication of, wow, just by wearing a dress, I could make one of my friends who's a designer instantly famous. This is really cool. And Jackie is feeling the same, that she's always known about her fame, but now she can do it about projects that actually feed her soul and that she feels are important for the world. Now 50 years old, Jackie was in her prime. She was building her dream home on Martha's Vineyard. She had raised 2 children through uniquely difficult circumstances, and she had earned the respect of her peers in publishing. Now she was in love with Maurice Templesman, a man she had known since her years with Jack. She had no desire to marry again ever, and that was just fine with him because he remained married to his first wife and had no desire to divorce. Jackie had always had a penchant for married men and the emotional distance baked into those arrangements. But Maurice was different. He was devoted to her. Jackie Onassis, in short, had found her bliss. She was now the architect of her own life. And on the one hand, I can totally see how this would be satisfying to her in a general form, that she has someone who seems to be kind and cares about her and apparently is, physically satisfying to her. And yet for her, given her 2 particular large marriages, I can see why she would be attracted to the idea that he's got a commitment to somebody else, and so therefore I don't have to police whether or not he's committed to me. However, I feel like this is such a contradiction of everything she's felt in those earlier situations. I mean, let's just say it. Jackie was not wrong to have a problem with Jack's philandering. She was not wrong to have a problem with Ari's philandering. And so here she's actually, instead of honoring those earlier genuine and true feelings that she had, in a way it's almost minimizing it. Like, oh, well, now I'm going to be that woman. I don't know. I don't love it. I mean, I get why she's there, but I get why she does this. But it's out of weakness. It's not actually out of a place of strength to go and sleep with another woman's husband and have that be something you're really excited about because, hey, then there's an emotional distance baked in. I don't have to worry about being his wife. That's cop out. You guys tell me what you think in the comments. Watching from afar was an unusual admirer, Gloria Steinem, the editor-in-chief of Ms. Magazine. And at the time, she was the face of American feminism. She asked Jackie, who hadn't given a proper interview since her days at the White House, if she would do so for Ms. Magazine. And to Steinem's surprise, Jackie agreed. I'll put up the photo here while I read about it. She appeared on the March 1979 cover, perched on her desk in a wide-collared shirt dress. Books piled on either side, her Cartier tank wristwatch the only nod to her extraordinary wealth, beaming next to the question, why does this woman work? What has been sad for many women of my generation, Jackie told Steinem, is that they weren't supposed to work if they had families. There they were, with the highest education, and what were they to do when the children were grown? watch the raindrops coming down the windows, leave their fine minds unexercised? You have to be doing something you enjoy. That is a definition of happiness, quote, complete use of one's faculties along lines leading to excellence in a life affording them scope. End quote. It applies to women as well as to men. We can't all reach it, but we can try to reach it to some degree. Now, I like this idea that this is a part of human fulfillment, just that having the capacity, having some area where you can utilize your natural gifts in a way that could lead to excellence, that's actually part of pursuing happiness in life or pursuing fulfillment. And I think that's true. I think that a lot of women struggle with finding that path after children. Many of us desire to prioritize children during that season and to set aside certain pursuits during those years when we are raising our children. And yet, we are not only that woman back there, we're also this woman over here that has grown and developed certain interests, still retains certain interests from childhood, like Jackie, that we wish to pursue as we get a little older. Steinem gently chides Jackie for not publicly taking a stand about the Equal Rights Amendment. She kind of is like, why did you privately back it but publicly decline to support it? But then she wrote, that's the unique individual she is. Neither Kennedy nor Onassis, nor even her own glamorous public image, but a woman who remains sensitive, funny, slightly outrageous, creative, intelligent, loyal to her friends, very demanding of loyalty. So Steinem concludes that Jackie Bouvier Onassis, as she now preferred to be known, was a net plus for modern feminism. For any married or divorced or single woman wondering if she too could have a career and be independent, look no further than this most unexpected role model. I mean, according to Steinem, you've got a grade card, and you get dinged for not having supported the Equal Rights Amendment. And, I'm not 100% sure about you, but it seems like you're better than average. Like you're probably good in total for feminism. So, Steinem has her own agenda, right? And she's seeing is Jackie someone that I can use to advance my own perspective on feminism? But here's the final way she wrote it. Given the real options of using Kennedy power or of living an Onassis-style life, Steinem wrote, how many of us would have the strength to return to our own careers, to choose personal work over derived influence? In the long run, her definition of work may be more helpful to women than the kind of conventional power she has declined. It's fascinating that Jackie chose what she chose, that she could have had what she calls derived influence. So she could have chosen, my name is Jackie Kennedy. That's like gold here in America. I can kind of take on whatever projects I want, say whatever I want, and people are basically going to listen because I'm like royalty. She could have done that, but Steinem points out that's derived influence. I want to contrast this with how Hillary Clinton handled her time in the White House. She actually took that derived influence and ran with it, even though she had not been the one to be approved by voters and proven by her record at lower ranks to then make it to the national scene. That's normally how somebody gets to the place of influencing national policy. So Hillary had taken that derived power and tried to use it. Steinem is lauding in 1979 that Jackie isn't trading on derived influence from who she married. Instead, she is making deliberate choices in her own life that then could serve as an example to others. So rather than Jackie seizing power, or even, like she said, she could have just had this opulent life. She could have just gone off and then made statements. We have celebrities who do that all the time, right? They live these opulent lives and then they tell us what we've got to do, and they expect for us to do it because they feel that they have some sort of influence, whereas they don't have earned influence. They have not worked through the ranks and proven that their opinions are reliable and therefore we should listen to them. Instead, they're just kind of famous. They're rich and famous, and so they expect, and it's not that they can't have a voice, but their voice ought to count as much as any random person on the street, because their voice hasn't actually been proven through the fires of thinking through policy, sitting through committee hearings, understanding how it affects the local, the local scene, how it affects the state legislators. That's how you get to the place of being able to normally have a valid voice at the national level. And Jackie, whether intuitively or whether out of other fears, whatever the case, Steinem is saying Jackie is not using borrowed or derived influence. And she's also not often her opulent life, but occasionally saying, sure, I'll support that equal rights amendment. Instead, she's making choices in her life that actually do give a sense of dignity to herself through her work, and also present an option to other women. And so Steinem essentially says, I think that's actually really valid and might be more helpful than anything else she could do. Jackie told Steinem, I think that people who work for themselves have the respect of others. I remember a taxi driver who took me to the office. He said, lady, you work and you don't have to? I said, yes. He turned around and said, I think that's great. The final look that we get at Jackie in the book is that she never thought twice now about grabbing a big, bold pair of sunglasses from the basket, swinging her namesake Gucci bag over her shoulder, and heading out of 1040 Fifth Avenue right off to work. Right across the street in the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the ancient Egyptian temple of Dindur, which Jackie had officially received as a gift to the United States back in 1965. Another time, another life. Then Jackie would look south, turn left, and disappear into the crowd, just another New York woman on the go. So the final look that we get of Jackie is a woman who has reinvented herself. She is comfortable disappointing people. She's comfortable not speaking for every possible thing, but she's speaking up for the things that matter to her. And she's ultimately deciding, which I think this is also so healthy and good. She says, people who work for themselves have greater self-respect. And actually, perhaps her life of relative ease had given her the tools to see, it is good to be good and tired. And there is something good for the soul and the mind and the body when we do work that we feel is important. So she had that. And now I feel like, I know in the title, they took out the name Kennedy, that she kind of was excising that part from her life. But I would say she's still a Kennedy, right? She still is connected to that family, obviously, not just through her children, but she maintained some of those relationships, like we heard a few chapters ago with Joan, that she was still encouraging Joan and helping her through her marriage in its final gasps for life. And then she's Onassis still. She has the money, she has the ease and the perspective that brought, but she's not entirely Onassis either. So I think, rather than having cut out Ari and cut out Kennedy from her life, I think actually she has brought those epochs into her current life. And I think that's when we're the strongest, is when we can look at something we were back here, whether we loved it and now we don't have it and we feel sad that we don't have it, or whether we hated it and we're glad that we're away from it, to at least look back and tell the truth about it, and then bring that truth with us into the current season of our life. And I think she did. One thought that I had was that I feel like she became a woman that was more in line with Black Jack and her husband Jack and Ari than she probably would have been comfortable admitting. Somebody who treats sex meaninglessly, gets on with their work, has meaningless sexual encounters, and then apparently she did settle down with one particular man. I'm not trying to trash her. She was living according to different moral standards than the ones that I have. But I do think that certainly she also probably, if she was telling the full truth, would have admitted that none of these relationships were fully a picture of what ought to be. That she was willing to settle into something that felt comfortable and still familiar and connected, and yet ultimately had no commitment between it. And that, to me, that's sad. Got to tell the truth about it. To me, that's sad. But I do think that this final chapter has one big good lesson for us as older women. I know some of you are quite a bit older than me. Some of you are younger, and some of you aren't women at all. I think Jackie is this great model of telling the truth about what you're good at, but also being humble and willing to learn, and in a way, willing to start over. I think it's phenomenal that she was willing to just take a simple junior office, make her own lunch, kind of work through the rigors of her profession. And that provides sort of a pathway for many of us that, as we do, which if all I had was 2 or 3 children, then I would be at the point where all of my children would be adults. And so I'd be looking at, what am I going to do in this next phase? Now, where I actually am in life is my youngest is still 6.5. So I've got quite a ways to go. However, in some ways, even this YouTube channel is an expression of, I have a little more mental space freed up. I'm not still chasing toddlers and nursing babies and guiding little people into a respectable pathway for life. I'm no longer, doing all of the basic training of like, don't color with Sharpies on all of our stuff. Don't rip up books. I don't have to worry about those things anymore. And so in a lot of ways, I'm at this stage of kind of humbly coming back to something that I love, physical books, and finding a path forward in this current world that's different than the one I left, which was for me 22, 23 years ago. So, I'm in this phase. And so here are some of the lessons that I thought are interesting and fascinating to take from Jackie. She was willing to hone in and identify what she was truly good at. I think that's a good lesson to think, what am I good at? What do I have with my interests, with my personality, with the actual pattern of my life? What do I have to give? And then to be humble and willing to learn, to take a risk on something that might initially make you feel small. I think that's such a good model. And I do want to say too, something that isn't mentioned here. I looked up, I couldn't remember if she had grandchildren when she passed away. She passed away in 1994. But she had 3 grandchildren in 88, 90, and 93. So her grandkids would have been roughly like 6, 4, and 1. They were all Schlossberg's, Caroline's children. And so I will say that for some of us, like for me, that's something I'm aware of as I'm creating this thought of what I might like to do with the rest of the years that I have on earth is, yes, I do want to bring in what I'm interested in. Yes, I do want to be humble and learn how those skills are useful in today's world. And also for me, I want to prioritize whatever time I'm going to want to have with my future grandchildren and with my own children as they become adults and create their own lives. So, as women, we do have different questions. It's a lie of modern society that men and women have all identical concerns and questions. We just don't. You can sit in judgment of that. I know Steinem would have, like, why should men, get to go into their career and not have to think about their family, and why should women have to? Well, I think in a different way we get to. We have relational differences of even how we relate to our children and how we relate to our grandchildren, and that's okay. We don't have to be carbon copies of men. And so, but for me, it's like, okay, how can I take these lessons of Jackie Onassis and use them toward the trajectory that I mean to go? And that's what I really take away from her is whatever future capacities or future opportunities I have that might be priorities for me, how can I deal with my past life, bring it into the current space, and be humble and willing to risk and learn so that I'm setting myself up for a satisfying future set of years. So, good chapter on Jackie. I really appreciated it. I appreciated that we aren't given a completely cleaned up look of Jackie, but we're just given who she really was. And she had reinvented herself. She still bore the marks of earlier wounds that she had received, and yet she did come to a place of rest and seeming satisfaction in her final years. So Next time we get to have our epilogue of follow up on all the women and what had happened from these stories, and we will come back through and we'll also look at the book as a whole. Just what do we do with this many stories, with this much heaviness, because this chapter actually wasn't heavy, but most of the chapters have had some real heartache in them, and some of them have moved me to nausea. And so let's talk about those. Let's wrap it up together. Come back and let's celebrate having made it through the book. I will see you next time. Bye.